the OECD has done a lot of work since the COVID-19 crisis exploded. We have a couple of questions we want to ask within this global conversation and within this framework. Mainly, what's the role, according to you, of the public sector, so government, in order to enhance collaboration between the central and the local communities and general speaking between economies? In other words, how we can collaborate better? Can we use data to deal with this situation in terms not just data, economic data, but other data research and whatever is needed to solve, or at least to deal with the present crisis?
Thank you, Daniela, and it's really a pleasure to be participating in your forum, PA, and particularly at this unique time where there's been, unfortunately, a lot of human suffering. Italy hasn't been spared, and for that I'm reflective and sorry about that. But also it has shown, I think, the growing importance of the public sector and kind of revival of the need for government and its role in combating a crisis. It was never in question in some countries, but in others, you've seen a tremendous kind of respect and support that hadn't been there before. You know me well. I think technology it's a catalytic effect when you go through a crisis. We've seen it before, that trends that were already underway get a boost. And that's certainly what COVID has done, particularly for digital technologies. They've allowed us to stay in place, hopefully dampening the curve and allowing the medical system to cope with the surge. But they've also given us new tools and changed human behavior in a way that is really remarkable, given how quickly it has happened. I think at the center of this, just as you say, is an increasing handshake between the public and the private sector, the providers. It's not only the infrastructure, which has carried this load, which is incredibly impressive. Just watch the networks deal with 40, 50, 60% increase in data, and they're supporting it. But it's also working hand in hand with some of the companies to try to figure out how to make these trace and track apps work so they're suitable for government needs, but still protect important rights such as privacy, but help us combat this crisis. And I'm watching very closely as Italy rolls out its Immuni, I think, which is a great use of technology to trace and track and probably complement human efforts here. So again, it's the handshake with the private sector. And it just shows the growing importance of data to our economies. I mean, you and I already knew it, but now you see that it's just fundamental. Data is how we're doing the teleconference right now. Data is how we're probably entertain ourselves at night. This is all a new world, and certainly that trace and track app will rely on data. So I think it's the appreciation of data in maybe a way we hadn't before that the crisis really brings to the fore.
Okay, thank you. I have a question that was, well, it just came to my mind just now. The OECD in the past has done a major work on global value chain. And the international global value chain has affected in major ways countries, especially at the beginning of the crisis, where, you know, we couldn't get masks, we couldn't get equipment, not just because other countries were mean, I'm just using this word, you know, to be more popular, but just because they too were shut down, you know, and so the production was halted. So how do you see for the future? I mean, how we can reconcile efficiency with resilience? So how do we make this global value chain effective, efficient, but at the same time, what would be the recommendation, the OECD recommendation to the countries? I mean, how we can, what should we keep, you know, inside, or in a way that we can face another crisis? And as I say, it's not just rocket science, it was mask, you know, was the PEEP.
Yeah.
So things that were vital.
So that's a really good question. And I think the first thing I would say is it's all about risk management, Daniela. And, you know, if you keep all your supplies, all your facilities in one country, even Italy, you may increase your vulnerabilities and risk than if you have multiple supplies, multiple sources that keep the supply chains going. Your country, I've seen it, has experienced earthquakes. Japan has. If all of that production had been taken out, all of a sudden, you become more vulnerable. So I think that's the first thing. The second thing is, yeah, there's probably some, we've woken up that there's some basic entities that maybe we should have a slightly larger inventory of, build more resilience through some stockpiling efforts. And I think the crisis has kind of underscored that. I do think that still we've built these supply chains, particularly the IT sector is so dependent on getting it those components from all over the world. That's going to be hard to change. And if you do, you're going to make those goods a lot more expensive, and then you'll have the unintended effect of decreasing diffusion, which we particularly need right now. I mean, the digital divide is not only just a popular slogan, it's become a fundamental social good now. And I think we need to double down on trying to reduce that. So I think those countries that have been mean, as you say, have done it because they're worried about their own domestic situation, which I think we all understand. But it could have a boomerang effect, that it could actually make them more vulnerable. That's the OECD position. I guess I would say before the crisis hit, we had seen the length of global value chain shortening, and we can measure this. And that was due to a couple factors. There was trade frictions that you know well about, but it's also the topic you and I look at is the digitalization of many sectors. And I just don't mean the IT sector. I mean like automobiles, where it means that you don't need this thanks to automation, the wage gap between domestic suppliers and foreign have decreased. And so your need to go abroad isn't what it used to be. And so it may not be what they call onshoring, but it's more nearshoring. And you've seen this with automobiles, GVC, global value chain of Europe, where Eastern Europe now has become a huge supplier for a lot of your big firms.
And here I have the last question, and this is digital transformation and the three keywords you think that will make the digital transformation happen, not just in some countries, but all over the world in an inclusive and sustainable way.
No, you might have to give me a few more than 3, but because if it was my Secretary General, he'd say skills, skills, skills. And so it's really developing that know-how. Which makes things far more inclusive. It means you don't have these pockets that don't know how to use the technology. It's also about connectivity, and here fiber optic is very important for carrying the load. And the last is follow the data. I think data is a new resource that we need to be accountable to and accountable of. And this will be, I think, shaping policies for the time to come. We need to rethink policies around data and access and control and ownership.
Just the last thing about Timoni, because you mentioned it. Reading through the OECD, by the way, especially the work that TIP, so the innovation and science, working party is doing, we learned that this content tracing in the past was done in a more invasive way, because there were actually government officials knocking on the door, and sending people to hospital or, to special places. So what's your feeling? I mean, what would be your recommendation to the Italians, to the Italian citizen about Timoni and any other content tracing application at this very moment?
Thank you for that question. I think it's part of a bigger solution, and so I would. And what's important for the Italians, if we're going to make it work, you have to have widespread adoption. I mean, you need to get it up high enough so that if you come into someone who is infected or has been infected, that it can be detected. I think you raise a really good point. We forget about what the analog world used to be like, and how it too carried its biases, its foibles. And I don't think we should expect the digital world to be perfect, but we should work toward trying to make it as good as we can. And inevitably, and this is why I leave this to politicians and not to me, they're going to have to make some choices about what is the priority for society and for the economy. And that's why they're elected officials. And I think that's what's going on around the world. And as I said, it gives you a new appreciation of data. That I should point out, it's not just about personal data, although for this trace and track, it is, but it's data about the number of intensive care units you have. It's the data about the number of ventilators. And so a lot of data doesn't have a high personal content to it. I think this is part of our growing awareness of the importance of it.
Okay, thank you. And thank you, Andy, for your availability. We know that you are very busy, but we really appreciate your contribution to this Forum PR, which has been different this year, and hopefully we'll have you next year here in Rome. Okay.
Very much look forward to that. Thank you for the time and the opportunity to speak.